funerary mask of Agamemnon. Sounds so mysterious, like an ancient myth or a treasure from a fictional novel. This mask has been studied by many historians and archaeologists to determine its origin and authenticity, and those questions for some have still been unanswered. That is what makes this mask so interesting. Was it truly the funerary mask of the great king Agamemnon of Mycenae, or of some other great king? Does its date place it around the Battle of the Trojan War, or was it crafted hundreds of years before? Those are just some of the questions that have been asked about this golden mask that is now on display at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, Greece. Most historians would agree that this mask is not the mask of the great King Agamemnon, and it's been predated before the Trojan War by about 300 years. So many unsolved mysteries surrounding this piece of antiquity. But before we try to find the fact or fiction behind the mask, let's look at where the mask was discovered and the history of the site of where it was found. As described in the Humanities Volume 1, Culture, Community, and Change, 4th edition, published in 2019 by Henry Sayre, the Mycenae culture is the last of the Bronze Age cultures. They were warlike and described as living in communities surrounded by fortified hilltops, and battle and hunting scenes dominate their art. They were a wealthy civilization who became prosperous through trade and had many political alliances. The poet Homer wrote about Mycenae when he composed the Iliad, describing the events leading up to the 10-year Trojan War. According to Henry Sayre, most scholars believe that these Homeric epics were pure fiction until the discovery by Heinrich Schliemann in the 1870s of the actual site of Troy. Schliemann was fascinated by the stories of Troy and determined to find the burial site. He found the site in Mycenae by following the descriptions written by a geographer Pausanias in his manuscript written around 180 CE. In the book Pausanias' Description of Greece, Volume 1, Translations by J.G. Fraser in 1898, Pausanias describes where the burial sites were located within the city walls, how many grave sites there were, and who were the deceased within them. He even tells of a second burial site located outside the city wall. Schliemann began his excavation in Mycenae on August 7, 1876, and ended it in December of the same year. He located 5 grave shafts just inside the fortified walls of the citadel, which have been known as Grave Circle A. There was also another discovery just outside of the wall known as Grave Circle B, just as described by Pausanias. Among the graves were vast treasures, and the Humanities, Volume 1, Culture, Community, and Change, described by Sayre, tells of gold and silver death masks of fallen heroes, as well as swords and daggers and delicately carved ivory, which were detailed with war scenes fitting the description of the Mycenae culture. Of the bodies, 5 wore funerary or death mask, and the most remarkable was a golden mask, approximately 12 inches in height, made of pure gold. The masks were made by hammering out gold into a thin, flat sheet, and then hammered against a wooden mold with details of the face carved into the wood. Fine details would have been added later. Schliemann's discovery finally linked the myths of history of ancient writings to real antiquity. But researchers claim that his findings predate the Trojan War by 300 years. In the book Gods, Heroes, and Tyrants, Greek Chronology and Chaos, written in 2009, Emmett Sweeney attempts to disprove this theory. In his opening line of the book, Sweeney states, "In the book that follows, I shall be arguing that early Greek history as found in the textbook is seriously misstated." He claims that the Egyptian chronology is flawed and are the root cause of the timeline inaccuracies in history. By comparing their archaeological finds, known to be around the same time as the Mycenae culture, along with the style of pottery, geometrical artifacts, and writings found from this period, he sets out to disprove this timeline anomaly, placing the remains of the deceased around the time of the Trojan War. I would also like to mention that Sweeney makes a persuasive argument to his case by comparing the contents of the artifacts found in Grave Circle A to historical accounts of what was said to be the grave shafts. Sweeney writes, "It should be remembered that Schliemann was drawn to the grave shafts by tradition. According to a legend reported by Pausanias, Agamemnon and his followers had been buried by Clytemnestra inside the citadel walls, just to the right of the Lion Gate. The spot, said Pausanias, was marked by a circle of marker stones still visible in his time. And in fact, within days of starting the work, Schliemann was able to confirm the existence of the stone circles, for the digger struck upon several of them almost immediately. Many are skeptical that the contents found within the graves were placed there during the excavation, even though being supervised by the Greek Archaeological Society. One such historian, Professor William M. Calder III, attempts to prove Schliemann's findings to be a hoax in the article written in 1999 titled "Behind the Mask of Agamemnon." He writes, Gunter Kopsky of New York University Institute of Fine Arts has stressed that the Agamemnon mask is stylistically different from all the other Mycenaean masks. The stylistic differences noted in the differences of the other masks from the burial sites were far less detailed. The eyebrows, for instance, are separated on the Agamemnon mask, whereas the others are connected. The ears are detached from the mask, and on the other, the ears are placed within the whole piece. The chin is pronounced, whereas the others lay flat, and there's a beard and mustache, which with the others, they do not have it at all. Not to mention there's much detail added to those features. Kopsky suggests it is the work of an innovative and highly talented goldsmith. Calder claims that Schliemann had the mask crafted by a relative of his wife, who was an Athenian goldsmith, and then planted it in the burial site during the excavation. He references a timeline in which the excavations were closed. In the article, he states that the excavation was closed on November 26th and 27th while Schliemann was away. He also claimed that a request to determine the authenticity of the mask by means of scientific testing had been rejected by the Central Archaeological Council in 1983, following the National Archaeological Museum's negative opinion. In another article, The Face of Agamemnon, in 2005, attempting to debunk these claims made by Calder, Oliver Dickinson counters such claims with historical evidence. In his article, he discusses in detail the artifacts known as burial mask NM624, also known as the Mask of Agamemnon, and burial mask NM623, known as the round-faced man. Dickinson notes that when Schliemann's discovery of the graves within the burial site, known as Grave Circle 5, he discovered 3 burials within the grave. The first grave found had no mask and very little artifacts. The second mask, known as NM624, had some artifacts and a decorated gold breastplate, but the burial site that was given the most attention was the burial site of NM623, or the round-faced man, as it was filled with many precious goods, gold and silver, and the body was given more care in its preservation. It's important to know that Schliemann ended the excavation in Mycenae with this burial and not by the mask covered with NM624, for this undermines the attempt that Calder chose to close the findings by NM624. So what do you believe? Do you agree with the archaeologist Henry Schliemann, whose passion for discovering the remains of King Agamemnon led him to the discovery of the shaft graves of Mycenae? Do you question the timeline of ancient Greece and place the mask around the time of the Trojan War? Or do you side with those historians who predate the mask to another civilization? Regardless of the debated timeline and the true owner of this fabulous piece of history, this is undoubtedly the most fascinating pieces of art I have ever studied, one that will still be debated in the future. But that's what makes history so intriguing. The more questions that go unanswered, the more we will want to find out the truth, to gain an understanding of those people who came before us, their way of life, and try to piece together what is fact and what is fiction. Because through discovery, we find a little piece of ourselves, how we came to be the civilization we are today. Like this mask intended to preserve the identity of the deceased, historians have been able to give us a glimpse into the past by uncovering artifacts that do just that, preserve the past. There's no way of knowing for sure the identity of the man behind the mask. The only thing that is certain is that this discovery will lead us to asking more questions that will lead us to more discoveries.